It is a great honor to be here today. I first came to SPRU in 1980, long time ago. I think some of you were not born by the time. And being back here and being invited to talk about these issues is really a great pleasure for me. And so the title is, of my presentation has been negotiated between Daniele and myself about the Frascati Manual. And when I was thinking about this presentation, I said, well, in a way, a presentation is like a book. And when you write a book, you tend to dedicate the book to somebody. And of course, the person that came to my mind is Freeman, who was my mentor, who was a person that some of you have met, and who was really not only an intellectual that established all this area of studies, but who was also, from a human point of view, a very important person. This is an obituary that was written by Peter and Jackie Sanker. And they say Chris was an intellectual powerhouse and an inspirational teacher. We admired his integrity, his warmth, his generosity, and his genuine humility. He would sit and join in the chatter in a group of students and behave as he was the novice and they were the experts. I think this is very true. From a human point of view, Chris was an outstanding person. The outline of the presentation is this: science and technology policy and indicators. As Maria has said, I have been involved for a long time with the indicators exercise that we have worked on at the OECD, European Union, in different countries, as it's a huge exercise. The Frascati Manual, that was the main topic that was assigned to me when I was invited to come. Indicators and policy making. That is the other part of my presentation, how these indicators are used. And finally, I would conclude with some remarks. And I will keep my presentation within these 40 minutes. Just to make clear about what we think or how we decide define indicators. Indicators in the area of science and technology are defined as a series of data which measures and reflects the science and technology endeavor of a country, demonstrates its strengths and weaknesses, and follows its changing character, notably with the aim of providing early warnings of events and trends which might impair its capability to meet the country's needs. Indicators can help to shape lines of argument and policy reasoning. They can serve as checks. They are only part of what is needed. Usually when we talk about indicators, we use the metaphor. You know, with indicators, we measure the tip of an iceberg, and given that we know more or less what is the relationship between the immersed and submerged part, then we understand something. Here I would like to underscore two particular dimensions of this definition. That is the country. So the main interest is the interest of governments for looking at what is happening in a country. And also, that is very important thing, is that an indicator gives you just a hint of a part of a very complex system. And of course, indicators have a meaning within models. Otherwise, you just have data, figures that you don't know how to interpret. And then we have linear model of innovation, chain-linked, triple helix, open innovation, all these models that help us to use indicators in this framework. It is not a very simple thing, but this is what we tend to do. I mean, as I told you, I've been very much involved in the production and analysis of indicators. So I feel part of a large community. Maybe it is not a chance that today I'm wearing this tie. This is the NESTI tie. NESTI is a group of experts on science psychology indicators. We are proud to be a selected group of people. So the subject is Frascati Manual. This is the cover of the Frascati Manual. Okay, this is the 2002 revision, and now we are going to revise it once again. The title. It is important to look at the title, because the title is The Measurement of Scientific and Technological Activities, proposed standard practice for surveys of research and development, the Frascati Manual. Some changes are going to be introduced in this. And over the years, the Frascati Manual has become a sort of Bible, not only for people dealing with science and technology policy, but also for other people, especially for approving laws. For instance, if a government has to, or had to introduce grants, fiscal incentives, every kind of thing having to do with the research, then they needed a definition of research. And so the Frascati Manual became the standard, not only for statistics, but also for policy making and even for writing pieces of legislation. Another important element to underscore at the very beginning is that the customer of these indicators are the governments. So the governments, after the Second World War, wanted to understand something about science and technology, in particular about the research, and then they are the main actors and those who pay for these indicators. And on top of that, we have also international organizations. I will elaborate a little bit, particularly the OECD, European Union, UNESCO, etc. Let's look at the role of the OECD in the development of science and technology measurement in the 1960s. When all this exercise was started in the 1960s, the Americans had a comparative advantage because they had already collected some figures. And so very few countries collected data on R&D in the early 60s. I just want to tell you that the first Frascati Manual was approved in 1962. I wish you saw something later. And the OECD offered a ready-made model for those who had not yet developed the necessary instruments. And the standardization was proposed by an international organization and not by a specific country. That could, of course, have some political meaning if a country imposed to somebody, some other country, a methodology, a way of measuring things. The Frascati Manual then was introduced in a petit pas strategy. So the first edition was an internal document only. It was not a real manual as we understand nowadays a manual in 1962. The first manual was tested in many countries, 1963 and 64. And it was revised in light of the experience gained from the surveys. So there was this process. And the Frascati Manual has never been an imperative document. Countries are totally free to apply its conventions. The OECD is a consensus organization. So the idea is that we work together, but it is not imperative. Just once again to be clear about what we are doing. The R&D data, the data on research and development of two types, money and people. Money, it is expenditure, and we have this acronym, gross expenditure on research and development. This is ex post measurement of what has been spent, and government appropriations, that is government budgets. This is the first indicator, right? And the second one is people, the people involved in doing R&D. A question that is a sort of silly question nowadays. Statistics, R&D, are good or bad? Well, at the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism. When the experts, and I will go in a moment into their names and figures, were involved in this, somebody said, come on, you want to measure knowledge, research, these genius people working around. But at the end of the day, we can say that now R&D data are part of the regular official statistics. So the quality of R&D data are quite similar to other kinds of data which are produced by official statistical agencies. A brief history of this Frascati Manual, and I think this comes to the first picture that we have here. That was the meeting in 1962. Everybody knows what Frascati is. Because somebody, it happened to me that somebody thought that Frascati was the name of the person that wrote it. Frascati is a town near Rome in Italy where you will see they have a special feature. And this is the first picture. You see, this is Chris Freeman. From the back, somebody can recognize him. Yeah, and this is the founding fathers in front of Villa Falconieri in Frascati, where there was this marvelous week spent on approving and discussing Chris's document prepared in 1962. Of course, we should also remember Ivan Fabian, Alison Young, that was working here with at the very beginning of SPRU with Iris Freeman. The first edition of the Frascati Manual. So what was the mandate of this manual? Freeman proposed standardized definitions, concepts, methodologies for conducting R&D surveys and measuring inputs, namely money devoted to R&D and S&T personnel, as I mentioned earlier. 4 topics were addressed. The first one was the very debated one, the definition of research, that we know that, at least in principle, it is divided basic research, applied research, and experimental development. The demarcation line between different activities, so for instance, research, teaching, production, etc. Sectors, university, government, industry, and private non-profit institutions, and this big issue that takes a lot of interest from statisticians, surveying methodologies. All in all, the basic idea, we can discuss at length about this, but the basic idea here was there was a sort of linear modelization. After the Second World War, people understood that in order to innovate, to have something new for defense or for health or whatever, needed some research first. And so also the idea of input-output was there, but this is, I think, safe prima facie to be said. Of course, over the years, R&D has changed. So you see some pictures of the R&D in the 1950s and R&D nowadays. In principle, you can say, yes, exactly, this is the same thing, but it has changed completely. So we maintain the idea that research and development is something that has changed maybe dramatically in many respects. So why then to revise the manual? There have been changes in the nature, the very nature of R&D, the deepening of the understanding of the phenomenon, changes in the statistical methodology, that nowadays we have completely different ways of approaching, using questionnaires, registers, whatever, and also changing the context, organizations, the economy, classifications, everything. We had 6 revisions. So the first one was the quantum leap in 1963, the first. Then we had the streaming with international classification in the 1970. The inclusion of social sciences and humanities, because at the beginning R&D was just meant something having to do with scientists in biology, medicine, engineering, etc. The objective classification that has to do with this G-bar, the data. Then the higher education supplement. That was another booklet I appended to the Frascati Manual. The inclusion of software and environment, how to deal with software. And the question, in 2001, the questionnaire and services and human resources for science and technologies. I will go back to the questionnaire thing in a moment. And now, the revision is underway. It has started 3 or 4 years ago. This year, possibly at the end of the year, there will be another Frascati meeting, and most likely the decision will be made to introduce these changes that I will mention to you. And then early next year, the group of the OECD is expected to approve officially the revision of the Frascati Manual. You see that there was not a regular process of revision, sometimes more than 10 years elapsed from one to the other. That is the story. So, and just to remind you, there is a definition of research and development. Then I don't read that for you. All of you surely know that by heart. And so we have basic research, and the definition for basic research, applied research, and the definition for applied research, and we have a definition for experimental development. I think that is very easily available. And the other one is personnel, persons employed in R&D activities, including managers, etc. And then we divide these people into researchers, technicians, and equivalent staff, and other supporting staff. So the data are broken down by these 3 types of professions. On top of the Frascati Manual, we have now what we call the Frascati family, other manuals, and Maria has mentioned. So first one is the Frascati Manual. Nowadays we have the version of 2002. Then we have the Technological Balance of Payments. That was approved in 1990. Then we have the Oslo Manual, dealing with innovation in companies, only in the private sector. We have the Patent Statistics, that is a manual that sets guidelines how to use patents data in a harmonized way. And we have the Canberra Manual, that is the manual giving the measurement on human resources on science and technology. What we don't have is a manual on bibliometrics. That is a strange thing. I have been involved in this for many years, but I never understood why. The OECD started working on a manual that could be like the patent statistics, but never happened. So we don't have nowadays a manual for bibliometrics. The point is that we have no harmonized R&D questionnaires. So we have the manual, but each country has its own questionnaire. So we have a tour of R&D questionnaires that we did last year, and you can see here the first one is the Italian questionnaire, this is the Irish, this is the Belgian. I think each country has a different interpretation of the Frascati Manual. That could be something to debate. The other manual is the Oslo Manual. Here, in fact, when we started, and Maria mentioned that, we started off writing this manual for measuring innovation in industry. Then we said, okay, we need to, from the very beginning, to have a harmonized questionnaire so that the data come from the same matrix, you know. Oh, the point is that after a while, we now have two series of R&D expenditures because through the innovation survey, we asked the overall innovation expenditure, including various items. And R&D, for instance, this is the Italian data, R&D, both carried out inside the company and acquired from outside, is 55% in the manufacturing sector, and it is 38% in the service sector. Then you have equipment, you have specialty equipment, you know, embodying new technology, design, and other technical activities in order to introduce an innovation. And this raises a dilemma, because if you take the difference between the two series of data, you will see that this is a difference between the business enterprise R&D coming from the CIS, sorry, this is the Frascati, this is CIS, the Oslo Manual. For instance, in Italy, the R&D measured for the same year through the Frascati Manual is higher than the other one. So you see, there is this inconsistency, if you like, which is quite normal because you have two different methodologies, two sets of reasons why industries are not exactly the same, the cutoff point of inclusion and exclusion, surveys which are censuses, in other cases samples, and whatever it is. But nowadays for users, this is a little dilemma.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
On the last slide, is it because one of them includes the government funding directly to the business?
No. This is just the performance. This is the performance-based data.
Business hardly?
Yes, it is performance-based. This is the money the company says they have spent last year.
Yeah, but I think one of them includes the money they also got from business.
Yes, of course. The fund, yes.
Not both.
Yes, both of them.
Both includes the money they got from government.
Yes, this is the performance angle. Then you have the funding, the financing one. Okay, the money could come basically from the firm itself, or from government, from abroad, or whatever it is, independent. But this is the performance. Now, the sixth revision of Frascati Manual that we are working on right now. First, we have a set of problems with the definition of R&D, because we have this definition that has been kept more or less the same for some years. Now we have some question marks whether to change it or not. In particular, we have one problem which has to do, I will show you later, with experimental development that looks like very much design. Now we are developing a design manual as well, and so the cutting point between real research and design, and research and innovation, because also is measuring the application part of R&D is important. We have also an issue of continuous research. That is one of the basic elements of the definition that were, of course, adopted by statisticians, because statisticians like to go there every year and get the information and go back. But we realized that in many small and medium-sized enterprises, R&D is not carried out on a continuous basis, but it is carried out occasionally. So there are some reasons why to go back and discuss whether we want to keep the same definition. Capitalization of R&D. Capitalization is very important in terms of impact on GDP. In some countries, the calculation has been made according to certain assumptions, and there could be an increase between 1.5 to 3% of GDP. The main responsibility of this exercise stays with the national accountants, who have to decide how to capitalize this expenditure, how to amortize it, deflation, whatever it is. The responsibility of people like ourselves in the Frascati context is to provide additional and specific detailed data that accommodate to the logic of system of national accounts, particularly, for instance, for software. And this is, in any case, in 2008, the systems on national accounts adopted the idea of including R&D into the capitalization part of the national accounts. We have a set of problems with globalization, both in the public and the private sector. We have also problems of public support to R&D. This is a rather, I would say, weak point of the Frascati Manual, because if we look at the financing, at the funding of research, you realize that public sector gives companies grants and tax incentives. But the measurement of tax incentive needs to be refined a little bit, because it is not very well defined. In some countries, really, it's countries like Italy, for instance, you don't have the R&D figure for government funding in companies, because this data is not available. And then the idea also of output. Once again, we said, okay, we have this manual that measures inputs into the R&D process. But what are the outputs? Shall we deal with the outputs and discuss to what extent the new knowledge developed by R&D may be seen somewhere or not? For instance, what is the relationship between R&D and patents and publications, biometrics and technological balance of payments, etc. So that could be, if it is adopted, could be a sort of manual for, rather than a manual giving guidelines, a chapter providing some thoughts about this R&D data can be located into the system whereby you produce and use new knowledge. We have also the issue of less developed countries, because in less developed countries they say that our definitions are a little too much designed around developed countries, while in the less developed countries you have different kinds of knowledge, and the production of knowledge, a reorganization of knowledge that could be included in the R&D data. And then we have methodologies that is something very, that creates a lot of nightmares for statisticians. Now, as I told you earlier, this is the measurement of scientific and technical activities, and so guidelines for surveys. In fact, what is going to be changed is this, because it will be for the compilation of R&D. Because now the approach would be not simply sending questionnaires, but also using other data from public and usually public registers. So how to compile R&D statistics using other sources of R&D data. In practice, there will be no appendices, because now we have, I think, 13, 14 appendices. Chapters will be reduced in size, and we want to use a sort of cyberspace approach, namely not waiting many years between this revision and the next one, but to change over the period, and so to have an electronic update, and even have a blog whereby users, policymakers, etc., can talk to experts in this field, the NESTI group, etc., and have some discussion on how to interpret, how to do things. So all in all, I think that the pillars will stay stable, no major changes in definitions, in procedures, or whatever. And so there will be adjustment, not a revolution. And of course, anybody is interested in having continuity, even though the reality is changing, but if you have a break in series, that makes crazy statisticians and users. And the impact of this change will be mostly on statisticians. So it is important that users then will read the new Frascati Manual, but a lot of the work is with producers. This is a triangle in science policy making. Now, I'm going to the SPRU nature of this institution, saying that we have policymakers that, in principle, design the future, analysts who interpret today, and we have data producers that just measure the past. The Frascati Manual usually comes after a couple of years, after the year when the expense or the people were involved. And who are these policymakers? For instance, this is a case, a former Italian president of the Republic who said, conoscere per deliberare. Know first and then sanction. He was a president of the Republic, and these words are in block letters at ISTAT, the National Statistical Office, where you produce the data, and they say, you should measure for us, and because before deciding, we need to have the figures. Also, other policymakers, Roosevelt after the Second World War, with Vannevar Bush, and his report on science and technology frontiers. So those who understand that it is important to do this kind of activities like R&D, innovation, and whatever. But also, we have other people. We have, for instance, Berlusconi, who said, why should we pay the researchers if we make the best shoes in the world? And his finance minister, said Tremonti, culture does not provide food. I don't know whether this is the appropriate way of translating. Con la cultura non si mangia. Is it okay? It's fine. So there is also this kind of policymakers. About the producers, this is the group of national experts on science and technology. And we had last year the celebration of this 50th anniversary of the Frascati Manual. This is a group, part of the group. This is the cake. And of course, Frascati is the place where good wine is produced. And this is the flask, this is a new one. And of course, we prepared also the label of this. And here you can see the mayor of Frascati addressing the group, saying how proud the city is being known around the world, at least between these people dealing with science and technology. What is the view of some statisticians, some people producing this data like myself? There is a dangerous business of statisticians because this is a very old quote, 1932. What matters is not how one fashions things, but what one does with them. Not the weapon, but the battle. The making of the using of the tool are different things in general. So what I think can be produced, can be said, are we armed producers like Mikhail Kalashnikov? Because we have I have no regret. This is what he said just before dying recently. Others are responsible for the bloodshed caused by the machine gun. It is politicians' fault not to be able to find appropriate solutions, but rather to resort to violence. So this is an extreme thing. But certainly, for people who produce this data, once published, one put at the disposal of everybody, you don't know what happens. And I could tell you a number of examples whereby this data have been inappropriately used on purpose, apart from the ignorance of users. The use of indicators. This is another old quote that I think applies. Secure this is 1919, so a long time ago, a century ago. Secure a quantitative statement of the critical elements in an official's problem. Draw up in a concise form, illustrate the tables with a chart or two, bind the memorandum, like this, in an attractive cover, tied with a neat note. Data must be simple enough to be sent by telegraph and compliant overnight. So this is the way of using and administering this kind of knowledge couple of figures, some numbers, some statements, by the time by telegraph. And here comes Benoit Gaudin. Benoit Gaudin is a colleague who is, I think, the most important scholar in analyzing the indicators exercise. In the various studies on productivity and the new economy, the OECD, we are talking about the OECD, it is not only OECD, constantly reminded the reader that the links between science, technology, and productivity have not been demonstrated. So officially it is said this model is not a general model. It is not demonstrated. Particularly the productivity is an important topic that was the topic of the earlier organization before the OECD, no? The Marshall Plan. A large series of graphs and figures could persuade the reader of the seriousness of the study. Although no statistics could be used to prove the emergence of the new economy, graphs and figures nevertheless served the purpose of empiricism. And I think it is not a wrong thing, because if you occasionally the OECD has produced very influential reports like a new economy, technology economy program, and many others. At the end of the day, you have some ideological ideas behind. You have certain guidelines, and it is in there. No, the model is not so clear, etc. So, but the figures, the tables, give the scientific flavor. This is just, for instance, an example. In the case of knowledge-based economy, that was the catchword used some 15 years ago. Knowledge-based economy, and you see the indicators that were used to depict these very complex things. The ones with red arrows are R&D data. BERD, GERD, the public R&D, GDP, etc. But just to give you the idea that you provide all these figures, but then what is the relationship between all these and knowledge-based economy? It's another thing. And also the mystique of ranking, because GERD, the gross expenditure for R&D, is used for target setting, from descriptive to prescriptive. And we all know that, for instance, the American GERD R&D ratio of the early 1960s, so we are talking about the beginning of the exercise, that is 3%, as mentioned in the first paragraph of the first edition of the Frascati Manual, became the ideal to which member countries would aim and which the OECD would implicitly promote. So we have this target in front of us. That was early 60s. And then when we moved to the earlier, it was somehow said that it should be 1% before measurement was really available. In Africa, 1%. In Lisbona, we know all this. Lisbona targets of 3%, 2% carried out by business enterprises, and 1% in public sector. Each country has its own target. For instance, US has more than 3%. Italy, for some reason, 56%. And many other countries. So this R&D GDP ratio, the intensity ratio, is considered to be the target, independently of the quality of the data which are behind that. Because society is not interested in bloody people like myself doing research. They're interested in the outcome, in the quality of life and the results. This is an elaboration of another idea of Benoit Gaudin. Official statistics mainly served discourse purposes. And in this sense, the accounting framework of the statistics presented within it were influential because they fit perfectly well with the policy discourse and rationality, efficiency, and accountability. As it actually is, the accounting of unofficial statistics on science is a metaphor, not an accounting exercise as such. Let's go back to Keith, because once he said something that I noted, and I want to tell you. You know that Keith used to work at the OECD before joining SPRU, and he said, one would think that the political agenda determines the collection and analysis of indicators, because you have politicians, they want to know, etc. But in reality, it's the other way around. It is the availability of indicators which steers the political discourse. You can see that this is a strong statement I think we should seriously think about that. Fred Gault, who's a colleague, a Canadian, who has been chairing, by the way, I'm not anymore chair of this group of, it is Fred and then others of the OECD. As a statistician, he says, policy analysts should be both literate and numerate, able to put a case using innovation indicators. Not only should the analysis have such a skill set, but they also require some knowledge of this subject. It is in this environment that monitoring, benchmarking, and evaluation lead to policy learning and to more effective policies. So in other words, we produce the machine guns, but we would be pleased if users know exactly how it works, how to use them in the proper way. Some concluding remarks. It is time for me to stop, and the first one is very clear. We should keep the dialogue between actors alive, actors, users, producers, analysts. This is a process that has really been developed very much if we look back in the early 60s, but a lot needs to be done. Theoretical development of models is our job. There's nothing to add to that. And this is something that I would like to underscore, because now it seems to me that there are too many economists around. You know, this R&D and innovation exercise, which is huge now, millions of people, etc., should be also looked at by philosophers, sociologists, psychologists, or whatever, because the reality has changed so dramatically that really we need this kind of contribution. Particularly, sociologists, I think, have stopped being interested in this area 20 years ago. Earlier, they did interesting things. Also, the international cooperation is essential. This is an exercise that you can't do alone. We need cooperation, and the OECD is still, I think, going to play a key role in this international development, both theoretical and practical. We have a lot of resource constraints. Everybody is complaining about that over the years after the crisis. Statistical operations have been reduced, or at least their budgets have been reduced, and users want more with less. And this is a big struggle. Informatics, whatever helps, but this is a big problem. And also, we have to keep in mind that as at the beginning it was just a matter of statistical agencies attached to governments, now we have also commercial producers of data, like biometrics, like or official data like patents, but the players from the private sector are becoming very important and even key in certain areas like evaluation. Later on I can tell you something about what is happening in Italy these days about evaluation, the use of this data. But I would like to conclude saying that science and technology indicators are in any case a public good, and the owner of statistics is the state. And by way of conclusion, I think I took this cartoon because we need to do this. You know, a virtuous, godly woman is a very, very, very rare find. If we cross out women and we put indicators, it's a very, very rare find. But we are trying to find the appropriate indicators. Thank you very much for your attention.